The Money Show. Personal finance.
Okay, so personal finance tonight, Warren Ingram from Galileo Capital. Okay, so we scared everybody on valuations, which is fine. We've set the tone. Some people want to know about why Warren Ingram is so against owning property. Let's just revisit that in 30 seconds if we can, Warren Ingram, because it's not that you're against owning property, but you just have some very good guidelines as to when and to buy and not to buy and how to buy and what to buy.
And surely if Tim Noakes can change his mind, can't I?
You're so on your own.
There's just no help there. I feel like dead air on the radio.
No,
okay.
That's called casting you out to sea and leaving you to swim or sink.
Okay, let me swim. So my view is that we have almost a default view as youngsters coming into the workplace. Our parents, our grandparents, everybody says to us, don't pay off someone else's mortgage by renting from them. Rather go and get your own place and start paying and buying your own house. And it's almost kind of a no-brainer. That's what everyone tells you to do, and that's just what you must do. My comment is that if you look at doing what a typical person entering the workplace would do, is they would move into a really small kind of starter place, and over a period of 2 or 3 or 4 years, they would then move into a slightly bigger place, and then maybe get married and move into a multiple bedroom place, and eventually have kids, then move into the biggest place they will own, and then maybe downsize again. And my view is rather wait and rent for the period where you're going to be moving every 2 or 3 years, because the transaction costs alone of actually buying the property, and then all the rates and taxes, etc., and then selling again, and the transaction cost of selling set you back quite significantly when you actually look at the capital growth. And so if you get to the point where you say, okay, I'm going to stay in this house for at least 8 years or longer, then it makes sense to buy the property. The transaction costs get spread out over a long period of time, and you get the capital price appreciation. But it's important to understand that house prices, if we look at something like there's a couple of these indices. So the oldest one is the one done by ABSA, and theirs goes back to 1966. And they'll look at house prices, and they've really haven't moved by much more than around sort of 1 to 1.5 to, at the max, 2% a year above inflation. If we look at just buying shares and we buy the index, then that grows at 7.5% a year above inflation, with all the big booms and crashes and that come with the stock market. So to me, from a pure investment point of view, buying something with a huge spread of companies like the index, as opposed to buying one property in one city in one country at the tip of Africa, massive concentration risk. I don't see it as kind of a no-brainer investment.
Okay, now let's assume that we'd like a home, we'd like to own our own home. We don't know where we're going to be 5 years from now, but we're going to make this commitment. You've got a checklist that we should go through in order to ensure that we don't do something stupid.
Yeah, so you've made the decision, and let's say you've bought the argument to that 8-year commitment. That's great. I think the one thing is especially if you're a first time buyer of property, you don't realize how many costs there are that just catch you, and they don't necessarily catch you right up front.
If you're a second or a third time buyer, you forget. Honestly, you forget.
Someone speaking from painful experience.
Bitter, agonizing experience.
So as we've just heard, you need to have a deposit. That's now become a standard. You cannot get these sort of 100% mortgages, etc. Those are gone.
How big are the minimum sort of deposits that are required now? 15, 20%? There was a time where 10% would do the trick, but it's probably no longer big enough.
Yeah, my experience is it's still around 20 to 25% of the value of the property.
So it's a lot of capital that you require in order just to put a bet on the table.
And that's as you said, just your entry point. Now, there are going to be a lot more costs to come, but that's the first thing. I don't think you consider looking at properties and actually, getting your heart set on one particular one until you've said, okay, I'm going to spend $1 million on property, and I've got my 250,000 rand deposit saved. What it will do, and it'll help a lot, is once you've got that deposit and it's in a money market account or something, in other words, accessible, it does give you negotiating power with the banks to at least get a better interest rate. But unfortunately, the days of prime -2 are long gone. I mean, you're lucky to get close to prime nowadays.
But with rentals the way they're going, I don't know how somebody saves 250,000 rand to put down a deposit on a R1 million property. I just don't know how that happens anymore.
Yeah, I think the people starting in the workplace, or I mean, even if you've been working for a while, it's kind of you're living back in that sandwich generation where people are staying at home longer, or they're sharing accommodation. So that's what I did. I mean, I shared accommodation with friends right up until I think I was 30, and I had to move out because I was getting married.
And then you're still sharing with a friend.
Now I'm sharing with my best mate.
There we go. No, it's a good solution. But yeah, okay. So deposit is big, and that is, I mean, it's an investment rather than a cost. Dare I say that? But you do have to have the upfront capital. We're talking about transfer duties, and on R1 million property, transfer duty isn't an issue. But when you start moving up into pricier properties, transfer duties start to add up very significantly.
Okay, so let's just say, I mean, sure, if you're buying a huge property, the transfer costs are going to be extremely painful. But even at that lower level, if you're not paying transfer duties, you are also paying a bond registration cost. There's always the lawyer's fees involved in this. Mm-hmm. So someone's going to get paid. You're going to have other costs as well. You're most likely going to have to pay some kind of cost for moving, your goods into your place. And then very often, especially nowadays, it's very hard just to move into a place that's in perfect condition. So you most likely have some kind of touch-ups or maintenance that you have to get done. And it's amazing how many times people move into a house and almost all the light bulbs go and the geyser bursts. And so just note that stuff's going to happen to you. And so over and above your deposit, you need that other money as well available for those things.
What sort of, I mean, as a ballpark, I mean, yes, so the lawyer's fees, the bank's going to charge you for doing the admin that they're going to do, the moving costs, and that'll depend on how much you're moving and how far you're moving it. But on the maintenance bill, I mean, realistically, what can go wrong?
Yes. What can go right? I think you want to set aside about 1% of the value of the property per year in maintenance. It might not get spent every year, but what you'll find is there will be, it might come in a big lump. So, a lot of people would say, oh, that's not going to be my issue. I live in a body corporate. I've got an apartment block and I only have to look after the inside. Fair enough, but guess what? You're part of a body corporate, which means that somewhere along the line, the whole of the outside gets painted. And very often, body corporates, if they're not well run, you suddenly end up with a special levy that you've got to pay, which could be 2, 3, or 4 times your normal levies. And you've got to have that money from somewhere. So I think you set aside 1% of the value of your property, whatever the property is, for those maintenance costs.
And in some cases that can be conservative, and it's money that, yes, you've got to spend to maintain the value of the property. But when it comes to selling this property, and so let's say you bought the property for R1 million, and there were the lawyer's fees. I don't know what these things cost anymore. It's been a while, but you're going to end up spending, say, 1.1 million rand by the time you've arrived at the house, in terms of all of these incidental costs. Can we say there'll be a 10% cost on the million?
I think that's I think that's a good safe margin to budget. So you might end up with a little bit of spare money then, and that's great. But I think you won't be surprised if it's very close to that. Yeah, I mean, and that's the cost of your R1 million property. And then you're spending another 10,000 rand a year, and it may not seem like a lot, but on just basic maintenance. And by the time you sell it in 10 years' time, that your real cost of the property is 1.2 million rand. And you've been paying the rates and taxes because that's what you have to do, and the levies and all of that sort of stuff. There's been a lot of cost associated with this thing. And then when you sell it, you've got to sort of subtract about 5% of the value of the sale price because you've got to pay an estate agent to sell it for you. Exactly, and it just doesn't go away. I mean, also just some of the things that catch people right up front even would be, and it caught me out was, you got to buy curtains. Suddenly, the windows are not all the same in every property that you live in. So just weird stuff happens that you just have to spend money on. And as you say, you're just running backwards before you actually get ahead.
But you're not averse to the idea anymore of owning bricks and mortar property. I mean, the idea of having it's don't treat it though as part of your retirement funding. Don't treat it as an investment, something that's going to give you a return, unless you plan to Airbnb it one day and that's how you're going to fund the old age home. It's got to be seen as a lifestyle asset, and you've got to budget accordingly.
I think that's absolutely right, and a lot of the time, I'm just thinking about people that retired from very often from Johannesburg and moved to the KZN South Coast, 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago, and living their kind of dream on the coast, and their wonderful properties, and all of a sudden, that area starts to die. The financial crisis kind of hit a body blow to all holiday properties. So suddenly these retirees are sitting there with not much flexibility now, and the area around them is crumbling, literally and figuratively, and suddenly crime becomes a big issue as well, and they can't sell their primary asset just to move somewhere else and live in the same sort of standard property because they're just not going to get close to what they originally paid, and that's a concern for me. So I think I always say with property, it's just not a no-brainer decision. You really have to go in with your eyes wide open, and unfortunately don't get emotionally attached to it, which is really hard to do.
No, and that's the trouble also. So often when you are doing things like a property purchase, or you're going to buy a car and you haven't done your research adequately, and you get emotionally drawn to the bricks and mortar, or to the slightly more powerful engine, or the up-spec'd car rather than the regular car, the danger is you go, it's only another 10 grand on a car, for example, for the flashy steering wheel, or it's only another 100,000 on this property versus that property, and look how much nicer it is, and it'll only suck 5 years out of my retirement funding. We must buy this one because we deserve it.
Exactly. My suggestion would be that you spend a lot of time on the net. There are a lot of great now property websites around, and so it's much easier to be a bit cold and dispassionate about the properties when you're looking at a picture rather than the real thing, and then you get a much better idea once you've looked at 20, 30, 40 properties as to what the real market value is and what you really can afford and get for your money, and then you go and identify the 3 or 4 that are absolutely within your budget.
There we go. Warren Ingram, thank you very much indeed from Galileo Capital. Your checklist for deciding whether or not you can buy a home. Understand that you need to understand all of those costs, because it's a time of great financial uncertainty. You're moving from one property to another. Perhaps you've been renting for a period of time, or perhaps you're selling this house and you're moving to the next one, and suddenly your cash flow is so badly impacted by these multiple costs, things that you hadn't thought of before you moved in. And that's absolutely pivotal. We've got a call